the Union soldiers were watching them and were stunned by their bravery. The fact that they were charging on an open field up against an array of cannon, and they couldn't believe it.
Radio talk show host Mark Levin today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. July 1st, 1863 was a warm, mostly cloudy summer day in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It was also the first day of the three-day Battle of Gettysburg, one of the most pivotal moments in the entire U.S. Civil War. On that day, and over the next 3 days, thousands of soldiers fought heroically and valiantly, many of them suffering gruesome injuries and death. A few months later, President Abraham Lincoln visited Gettysburg, and there delivered one of the most iconic and most revered speeches in American history. Now, 100 years after that, a Philadelphia man named Jack Levin, the son of immigrants, published a book about Abraham Lincoln, his famous speech, and the battle that inspired it. And 45 years after that, the book was republished with a new preface written by Jack Levin's son, radio talk show host Mark Levin. Now, the book was republished in 2010. The book is called Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address Illustrated. In 2010 is when I had a chance to talk to Mark Levin about it. So in just a moment, our conversation.
Have you ever opened a time capsule? You're about to. This interview is from national radio personality Bill Thompson's 30-year interview archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2010, Mark Levin. This is actually a book, this first of all, we should say, this is the book that your father first wrote 45 years ago.
That's right. 45 years ago, people seem to forget there were things going on in the country, too, like riots in the streets and protests and the early beginning of the Vietnam War, and the New Left was on the move, and the Soviet Union was on the move. The Cold War had been extended, and my father felt at the time that he wanted to put together contribute something to remind people what a magnificent nation this is, and that we'd been through hell before, and we can overcome it. And my father's a very modest man. He's very much the quintessential American. He worked his way up. He used his hands mostly, building a camp and a nursery school with my mother. He built the school, and he built the furniture and the toys and all the rest, but he'd always had an artistic flair and actually went to art school and was a designer in his youth, and had done a comic strip, as a matter of fact, when he was in the war, World War II. Mm-hmm. And he just felt there was a need then to try and inspire and motivate people to appreciate this country. And, about 8 months ago, Bill, he called me and he said, you know what, I think we're at this time again. And what do you think about us putting out a smaller version of the book, using the new digital technology to even bring the period pictures, make them more impressive with detail and so forth, and keep it simple. And I said, great, as long as I can do a preface about you.
I thought how appropriate that instead of going the Edward Everett route and going a 400-page treatise and examining every little phrase and every leaf on every tree that day meant, you chose to go the same route that Lincoln himself went, as contrasted to Edward Everett, and really compacted everything into just what Abraham Lincoln said that day with your father's illustrations, the Matthew Brady photographs. It is extremely powerful.
Well, you're very kind. And, really, when I saw the finished product, I felt that it's a great book for Father's Day, but even more so, it's a great book if you're a parent or a grandparent, you want to sit down with your kids, and go over that period of history and talk to them about it and show them the photographs and explain it to them because, Lincoln, it was a 2-minute speech, but every word was chosen carefully. And so what my father did is he took parts of sentences and tried to really illustrate them very carefully. He went through thousands and thousands of photographs and drawings at the time. And At the time, also, what he did is they didn't have, obviously, computers or very sophisticated technology for publishing. And he would sit down. You can get them at the stationery store today, those letters that you rub on and stuff.
I remember those, yeah.
Remember those? Well, he painstakingly did that with each and every page. And at the time, that was a big deal.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
We didn't have to do it this time, but the images are the same.
I was going to say, I'm guessing, I never saw the original 1965 edition, but I'm guessing that this is probably pretty similar, is it not? Except for the fact that now you've got computer technology that can make it look even more pretty.
Very true. And also, like I say, he didn't have to sit down and do that, but it's more compact. It's a book, to put on your coffee table and there's so many texts and textbooks that have been written about Gettysburg, the battle, the Civil War, the speech, and that's just not the purpose of this book. The purpose of this book is to remind people, to motivate people, to inspire people at a time when, where many of us feel it's very perilous. And also the preface is intended to remind folks about how wonderful our parents and grandparents are and how crucial that generation was in defending this nation and its principles, and that we, people my age and your age, we have a responsibility to do exactly the same thing.
I know there are photographs in here that I've never seen before, and I've studied a lot of Civil War books, and I've never seen some of these photos before. And I had, just for a moment, I guess a miniature version of your father's that day in 1937 when he saw in the parade a Civil War veteran driving past, and it really brought the war home for him in a very personal way that day. I felt that way looking at a couple of these pictures. I thought, I've never actually seen a dead Civil War soldier on the battlefield of Gettysburg before.
Well, when he put that photo in the original book in 1965, the publisher back then, a major publisher called Chilton, which basically does automobiles and so forth now, but back then it did a lot, a Philadelphia publisher, which is where we're from. There are a couple of photos there. One in particular, you see that poor soldier on the battlefield with his mouth open, and he's obviously dead and his eyes open. It's not a gruesome photo, but it really brings home the fact what occurred there. There was a lot of controversy back then, 45 years ago, whether to include it in the book, and he insisted on it. And today, it's not that it's commonplace. We see a lot more blood and guts, and this is not blood and guts, but to really look at these soldiers and to realize at the Battle of Gettysburg, there were 51,000 casualties. And it was so gruesome, that battlefield, with body parts and men moaning, and so many that they couldn't get to them, and so many that they couldn't take the Confederates couldn't bring their soldiers back south to bury them. They had to bury them right there. And that's why Lincoln went there in November. The battle was fought in July, over 3 days, November. And by the way, his invitation was almost an afterthought. Mm-hmm. And when he went there to commemorate the ground as a cemetery and so forth, he did it for the South and the North. All the soldiers who fought there, they were such heroes. I mean, you think about Pickett's charge, 15,000 Confederates, and General Longstreet, who was against this to begin with and was counseling Lee against fighting this battle, the Gettysburg battle. He said, we're not ready for this. And Jeb Stuart, a crucial scout for Lee, who had gone off and chased what he thought was a bunch of Federal troops, and in fact they weren't. He didn't have his scout out to tell him, and Longstreet was extremely concerned about it, and he was right, and he gave the order for Pickett to charge, and poor Pickett goes down in history as some poor schlub. He wasn't. He was actually a very good soldier who was told what to do, though that was horrific. They took cannon fire, and these men were torn to pieces on the open battlefield. The Union soldiers were watching them and were stunned by their bravery. The fact that they were charging on an open field up against an array of cannons, and they couldn't believe it. And so the battle there, it was so awful. And yet, for people like us, it is our history, and it should inspire us that we can overcome anything.
After this short break, Mark Levin explains why Abraham Lincoln thought his Gettysburg Address was a failure.
If you've ever wondered where to find the captivating books we discuss on Now I've Heard Everything, wonder no more.
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
Plus, when you purchase through our affiliate links, you're not only diving into great stories, but also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
back to my 2010 conversation with Mark Levin.
It was moments like that, I gather, that probably led Lincoln to say, as he says in his address, I'm paraphrasing him very poorly, that we don't have any power to consecrate this battlefield. Look what the people the living and the dead have already done.
That's exactly right. And as a matter of fact, when he finished this speech, it was 2 minutes long, and he had followed one of the greatest orators at the time, or considered one of the greatest at the time, Edward Everett, who'd just given a 2-hour speech. Lincoln felt he really bombed. He felt he really blew it, that it was too short, that he didn't say enough, that he didn't say the right things. And little did he know that it was one of the greatest speeches of all time, and one of the shortest speeches of all times. And nobody short of Edward Everett wrote him a note and told him this has to be one of the greatest, simplest, greatest, most appropriate speeches he'd ever heard. And Lincoln thanked him, but Lincoln basically felt it was a failure.
Did he honestly think nobody would remember it?
He did, because remember, he was invited there, and most of the people were there to hear Everett. People need to understand there was a time when Lincoln was not very popular. In the middle of this war, he wasn't very popular. And near the end of the war, one of the reasons he wanted to finish this up and have a crushing blow against the South once and for all was because they were concerned about the election that was coming. And he was also, after this battle, he was very upset because his forces didn't chase Lee's army into the South and destroy it once and for all. And he was extremely upset about it, and he was right, because the war just went on and on and on. And at that point, it was pretty clear the South was not going to win. We didn't know what the nation would look like exactly, but he was furious because the federal troops didn't follow the Confederates and take them out and end it right there and then.
Well, let me come back, I guess, maybe to close things out. Let me come back to what you were saying a moment ago about your father calling you recently and saying maybe it's time to do this again. What is the central message we can take away from the Gettysburg Address and apply it to politics in 2010 America?
Well, the central message is this. I get calls all the time on my radio show, and people are very upset and frustrated about what's happening to their country, and they feel like they don't have an impact. And there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot going on today in terms of spending and policies and transformation. And you sometimes wonder if we have a constitution or if people pay attention to the Declaration of Independence. So people are very soured on their government, and they're very upset about what it's doing, and they're wondering what they can do about it. And the message in this book is, number one, we're all Americans, and Americans don't give up. We don't roll over. We don't surrender. Number two, we've overcome much worse than this. The Civil War tore the nation to pieces, and somehow we managed to bring it back together and become the most exceptional nation on the face of the earth. And we can do that again, and we can do it right now. And that is the message in the book. It's intended to be inspirational.
And what a great tribute this is to your father, Jack Levin. I mean, what a great effort he has put in. What a great effort you've put in on this book.
Well, you're very kind. It's mostly him. I just wrote the preface. And
I couldn't help noticing the preface is almost as long as the book.
Well, because I don't know when to stop. That's the problem. Lincoln can give one of the greatest speeches of all times in 2 minutes, and it takes me 2,000 or 2,200 words to say whatever I need to say.
Yeah, but you know what, Mark? You're like if somebody said, "All right, Bill, you got to write 200 words about your dad and what a great guy he was." I couldn't stop at 2,000 words at that point. I mean, you have a great love for your father.
Well, I actually took the time, because I didn't know all this about him, to talk to him and ask him and my mother about a little bit about his history and so forth, and I found out remarkable things I didn't know until 8 months ago, that when he was a young boy watching that Independence Day parade in Philadelphia, that he had seen that Civil War vet and the impact it had. And I didn't know he was accepted to Disney Studios at a young age to work for them, and I didn't know that he had lied to try and get into the Army Air Corps when he was 17. I learned all these things interviewing him for the preface.
Jack Levin died in 2018. Mark Levin can be heard on his national radio show and also seen on Fox News. Now you can get your copy of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, illustrated by Jack Levin and Mark Levin, by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also find my 2005 interview with historian Doris Kearns Goodwin.
In Lincoln's hands, the qualities that we normally associate with decency, with a good person, sensitivity and honesty and empathy and kindness, became great political resources.
And my 1989 conversation with an historian of a slightly different bent, Richard Shankman.
He wasn't exactly born poor the way we all hear. You know, he was poor by 20th century standards, but back in his day, his father, in fact, was in the top 15% of landowners.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, she was one of the stars of an iconic 1980s TV series. She's very famous in that role, but she's also a very devout Christian. My 2001 conversation with actress Lisa Whelchel.
They wanted Blair to lose her virginity. And I just explained to them that, you know, God created the world, He created marriage, and I don't want to continue to perpetuate the lie that it's just a normal fact of life and everybody turns out okay as long as, you know, you practice safe sex.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.